Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Mung Bean Soup for the Soul, an initiative of mine to hold myself accountable, which I failed to do this past week. And so I'm going to get back on track, hopefully tonight, starting tonight on February 19th. And I'm reading from the book, The Microbe Factor by Dr. Hiromi Shinya, number one endoscopic surgeon in the world, voted on by his peers. The subtitle of this is Your Innate Immunity in the Coming Health Revolution. Again, Dr. Hiromi Shinya, number one endoscopic surgeon in the world. And by the way, he performed so far over 370,000 colonoscopies, and he's co-inventor of the colonoscope. I'm going to read from page 19, An Alternative Approach to Controlling Infectious Diseases. In the past few hundred years, researchers have identified many pathogens. The ones identified, however, represent only a minute portion of the countless microorganisms in the world. Even when an antibiotic effective against a certain infectious disease is developed, it is only a drop in the ocean of the activities of microorganisms. Antibiotics, to be sure, are a great advancement in healthcare, but they are not the complete answer to contagious diseases. For one thing, we have not developed a full understanding of these microbes. In fact, it would be almost impossible to gain a full understanding of the scope of their being. We should not forget that we as human beings are part of the nature and that we live within the realm of its rules. Unless we have respect for nature and humility before its forces, any medicine we might produce will not be an ad hoc solution leading to the counterattack by nature. The endless race between resistant bacteria and antibiotics is just one example of this truth. The treatment for tuberculosis is another. Tuberculosis has been on the rise for the past few years. This contagious killer disease is caused by tubercle bacillus. Until 1950, it was the number one cause of death in Japan. After the war, it brought the widespread use of antibiotics such as streptomycin. The number of tuberculosis patients dropped dramatically. For a while, tuberculosis was regarded as a disease of the past. Now, I remember reading this part, but it was the night I think I got dropped off, or I dropped off after 2 minutes, so I'm rereading. For a while, tuberculosis was regarded as a disease of the past. Recently, however, the population of infected persons is on the rise again, especially among elderly and young people. To cope with this situation, BCG vaccination is recommended in Japan, though not in the United States, where there is currently a low risk of tuberculosis infection. Even this vaccination is not 100% effective. When a person is infected with tuberculosis, tubercle bacilli remain in his lungs, and as the effectiveness of the vaccination diminishes and the resistance of the patient becomes weak, there have been cases in which tubercle bacilli suddenly commence promulgation, causing the onset of the disease. Some attribute the recent increase of tuberculosis to the change in effectiveness of vaccination, but I wonder if this is the only answer. The bacteria called tubercle bacilli are found in nature. Perhaps many of us have contracted tubercle bacilli without even aware of it. Contracting the bacilli does not necessarily lead to the onset of the disease. Statistically speaking, it is said that 1 out of 10 persons who contracts tubercle bacilli show the symptoms. Just 1 out of 10. Even if one shows the symptoms, the effects could be mild. There are, however, over 2,000 deaths of tuberculosis every year. It was, I believe, tuberculosis I had to have special testing for before I moved to Hawaii to be one who handles food sold to the public. Where is the difference among individuals contracting the tubercle bacilli? The difference is the resistance, immune strength of individuals. A strong immune system will reduce the chances of contracting diseases. This is not limited to tuberculosis, but applies to all contagious diseases. There are some out there now that it also, we don't like to hear it, but there's a good case to just get a strong immune system to protect yourself from any type of disease. Inevitably, our attempts to destroy pathogens will end up in the race we will lose. The only way for us to win against disease is by strengthening the human immune system. He says the only way to win against disease is by strengthening the human immune system, and I'm sure he's going to get into that now. The increasing number of people with tuberculosis is a sign that our powers of resistance may be in the decline, making us more prone to all diseases rather than solely relying on challenging microorganisms with antibiotics. Isn't there another healthcare approach that is more in line with natural laws? Preventive medicine must surely be part of the answer to this question. Yet, preventive medicine. When we trace human history, you will see that our ancestors had to cope with severe environments. Life was hard. There might have been inadequate shelter from cold or heat, grinding poverty, filthy living conditions, and deprivations of every sort with any number of negative results. Even now, there are many countries where the average lifespan is only 30 years. In the Meiji era in Japan, both men and women on the average lived only into their late 30s. The average lifespan in Japan has more than doubled, and Japan is now called the country with the highest level of longevity in the world. Even as longevity in the United States lags behind, way behind actually, and it's like number 38 behind Cuba, where they shoot people. You know, what is the reason for this? It is attributable to the economic growth from modernization. The Edo era in Japan, running from 1603 to 1868, was a time of peace and prosperity. There was no widespread poverty or starvation. The cultural life flourished and farming was popular. In some ways, it was an era more economically prosperous than today, and yet the average lifespan was much shorter. The reason is simple. The rate of infant death from such diseases as smallpox or measles was overwhelmingly high. This is certainly a miserable situation, and yet, if you take another view, those who survived the infections built immunity against many diseases. Anyway, those individuals who survived to adulthood were the chosen ones. They were likely much healthier and energetic than we are today. As killer diseases heartlessly weeded out the weakest among us, nature bred a disease-resistant population. To say that the average lifespan was in the 30s does not mean that everyone died in their 30s. That is just a lifespan figure reached by averaging all the infant mortality with the lifespan of those who made it to adulthood. There must have been a large number who lived into their 70s and 80s with more vigor than most older people today. If we are blinded by the average lifespan figures, we will fail to understand the physical strength of the average adult survivors. We have attained many conveniences in our life through rapid modernization. Because of infrastructure such as sewage systems, public hygiene has greatly improved, cutting back on infectious diseases that spread in unsanitary environments. The rampage of plague in Europe in the Middle Ages was partially attributable to the environment. The Europeans did not have toilets and simply dumped their waste in sewage canals beside their houses and drank from rivers were filled with filthy water. The large number of rodents in such an environment carried pest bacilli to various areas, quickly spreading deadly diseases. In addition to the establishment of public health sanitation, antibiotics and vaccinations became popular after World War II. And as a result, the number of people infected by contagious diseases was drastically declined. The longevity we have achieved in this way, however, means that many who might have died in infancy or childhood were saved, despite a weaker immune system that would have made them susceptible to fatal infectious diseases had they been exposed. Others who have survived these diseases and built up immunity remain vulnerable into adulthood, having never had the chance to encounter certain microbes and create the necessary antibiotics. Gringos, whoever they are, who travel the countries south of the border are warned not to drink the water there because it is full of bacteria that they will probably make them quite ill with quote unquote Montezuma's revenge. The natives in these countries, however, seem to be able to drink this water and cook with it with few or no ill effects. This is because they are used to it. They have been exposed to the bacteria in the water reportedly since infancy and developed immunity to all ill effects. The same thing would happen if they came from south of the border to the U.S. and drank the water. They might have the equivalence of Montezuma revenge, whatever you want to call it, Washington's revenge. It seems our sanitary conditions and the modern medicines with which we once thought to have conquered infectious diseases have actually made us weaker as a population and more vulnerable to disease. Our vulnerability is an unintended consequence of the advantage of medicine and our desire to free ourselves from suffering and death from disease. Of course, there is no need for us to abandon the advantages brought by civilization and modernization. No one wants to return to the days when it was a common thing to lose children to infectious diseases. We should be thankful and enjoy the affluence we have obtained. At the same time, we should perhaps relearn the ancient wisdom that the most important thing we can do for ourselves, our families, and our larger groups is to develop a strong, healthy body with strong immune power. Our ancestors had to conquer hunger and poverty. Our challenge is to regain the natural vigor of the human organisms. The key to accomplishing this lies in our daily lifestyle and prosaically enough in the health of our intestines. We can live to a good old age with amazing health and vitality if we have the guts. And then the next section is the gift of microorganisms. I'm at 12 and a half minutes. This is a short one. I'm going to try and make it through before I get cut off by the algorithm. And this is the gift of microorganisms. Even as modern medicine wages war against the microbes that stricken and kill, we have come to understand that by and large, microbes are our friends. In fact, without them, we wouldn't be able to grow, digest, or metabolize our food. There is an inseparable relationship between our intestines and microorganisms. In explaining the activities of bacteria in our body, we often divide intestinal organisms into beneficial bacteria and harmful bacteria. To be more accurate, however, most of our intestine flora are intermediate bacteria, optimistic microorganisms which do not belong in either category. Check that out. There's good and there's bad, and then there's like indifferent. So what do you do with the indifferent? The proportion of bacteria in our intestines is approximately 20% beneficial, 30% harmful, and the remaining 50% being intermediate bacteria. The key bacteria that contribute to the control of the intestinal environment are the intermediate bacteria. This is because when the proportion of harmful bacteria increases as a result of irregular meals and other bad eating habits, intermediate bacteria are drawn into the domain of harmful bacteria, and the majority of intestinal bacteria act as harmful bacteria, decomposing undigested foods and generating toxic gas. Given this bad environment, in time, the intestinal features deteriorate and various diseases begin to show up. So you can feed these intermediate bacteria with good or bad, but if you get them too much going in the bad direction, they join in the bad bacteria and they start getting problems. On the other hand, when the proportion of beneficial bacteria increases, intermediate bacteria are synthesized with beneficial bacteria, and as a result, the intestines will be inhabited with countless beneficial bacteria, soon bringing about a stable intestinal environment.